Hi, everyone, and welcome to this episode of AI in the Enterprise. We're going to continue the discussions we've been having, and some of the inputs I've had from you is to actually go deeper and double click into where the action is today. And boy, one area that I know gets a lot of coverage is supply chain and digital supply chain, and we'll actually go deeper into that. One of the biggest things I think we're learning now in the post-COVID era is that this is not a one-time sprint. This is a marathon. This is here to stay. And some of the changes we're making today and we're needing to make today are going to define the world of tomorrow and will separate the winners from the losers. And so it becomes really important from a digital perspective to get a deep understanding of some of the lessons we're learning and some of the progress we're making. And really just to do that, we have an expert, a leader, an implementer, a thinker, and a doer. It's Crista Wood. Crista, welcome to the show, and thank you for joining us today. And Crista is on the front line working in corporate environments with large enterprise companies, helping them think through, redesign, respond, and then thrive in this era. And so with that, first things first, Crista, hello and welcome.
Thank you.
Excellent. And Crista, listen, before we get started, I always do this, and I know my viewers enjoy hearing a little bit about each of our guests. Tell us something about you that perhaps I wouldn't have known in having worked with you, but that might be very interesting to people around us and to me.
So I think what's most interesting is I have an identical twin sister. She lives in Iowa, and my family business is teaching. So my twin sister has been on the front lines of e-learning, whether she was ready or not, for the last 8 weeks.
You know, it's amazing you said that. I don't want to take this discussion off track, but we have teen kids, and e-learning and all of the implications of digital, and that is just another fascinating topic. But that's great to learn about you, Crista. Coming back, I think, to the topic at hand. Listen, one of the things that I continually and constantly hear about from chief digital officers I interact with is this whole notion of agility as it pertains to business resilience in the post-COVID world. And agility is about responding to supply chain changes, demands, fluctuations. Tell us a little bit about how you see that problem.
You know, it's been a fascinating microcosm that I've been living in on the front lines of COVID demand surge for the last 10 weeks. And in fact, it's changing by the week in terms of how we approach it and how we look at it. So when you think about household cleaning items, shelf-stable food products, all of that essentially surged overnight due to panic buying once the true impacts and timing of the pandemic started to settle in with the consumers. And ironically, you know, in supply chain, we've pretty much been one speed. So we've been running supply chains very lean, only carrying 30 to 60 days inventory. You know, the tools and the systems are set up to run very sequential. They're almost kind of clunky. And when you sell 30 days inventory literally in 10 days, and you don't have enough inventory coming in the next 3 weeks, there's a huge panic that sets in. And, you know, we've talked about agility for a long time, but we've been forced to become agile literally overnight. And we've repurposed systems that were never designed to be agile.
I was just going to say that, look, allocation is a word we've known for a while, and I guess we've just dealt with it manually. Mm-hmm. No one expected this to change overnight, but it has changed overnight. And so if you had to do allocation differently and it needed to be much more agile and dynamic, how do you do that?
You know, that's a great question. And I'm working through that myself right now. So before, you know, allocation was an afterthought for household cleaning items and shelf-stable food items. You might have a couple SKUs in a category that go on allocation because there's been some unanticipated supply disruption, a line goes down, things like that. But when literally 90% of your SKUs go on allocation overnight, you have unlimited demand. So normally we spend the majority of our time in supply chain, you know, working within inches to get that forecast 100% accurate. And at the end of the day, the forecast is now irrelevant. We have unlimited demand. So now the focus has shifted to the actual supply plan and how much manufacturing capacity we have. So typically there's thousands of SKUs. Companies like to have a nice assortment, whether it's online, direct to customer, B2B, however they're going to market. And literally overnight, supply chain has to step into the driver's seat and say, hey guys, we can't manufacture all these SKUs. Now we have to optimize our supply chain to minimize the amount of times we're turning over those lines in the manufacturing plants. So there might have been, 12 flavors of a particular item. Now we're only going to make 2 because now our constraint is on the manufacturing side. So now we're looking at how do we plan in shorter cycles? So, before we were looking at a monthly plan, a weekly plan. Now we're almost looking at a daily plan in terms of what can be delivered from a manufacturing standpoint. And it's changing the communication back to the customers. So now we have to come up with a better way to determine how much of a limited supply each customer is going to get. And understand that the supply chain is changing by the minute after we make those initial allocation decisions. So in some cases, allocation runs against supply chain. So supply chain is meant to be flexible, change on a dime. Things change in minutes, not hours, not days. And allocation is meant to be very static, and it's meant to be based on a fair share.
And that's becoming agile, that's becoming dynamic. It's an interesting question you bring up, which is in the long, we've had this situation where we've had a proliferation of SKUs. And in many ways, I could say that that's been a great thing because you've got this mass marketing converting into personalized marketing and a market of one person, and you're able to meet all these needs exactly where they are. I think you're suggesting that there's going to be a funneling in to a core set of SKUs. Is that a short-term response to what's happening around us, or you think the world eventually will move to less SKUs, or you think the world eventually gets back to more SKUs? It's just that we need to get there in a measured and a managed fashion.
Well, I think all of us in supply chain are hoping that we continue on with a much more limited funnel of SKUs for a large variety of reasons, most predominantly being cost related from a supply chain perspective. But interestingly enough, we're grappling with that right now because, before, if 90% of your SKUs on allocation to ramp down currently, now the question that I'm asking everyone is, how do we ramp back up? So are we going to turn on all those SKUs? And if we do, what is the best data-driven way to decide how to ramp up, understanding that manufacturing capacity is still limited?
Yes. And so you bring up data-driven, and that brings me to the topic I love the most, which is digital automation, analytics, AI, and really building that foundation of data. Talk to us a little bit about some of the things that you think are working around applying digital techniques to solving what I think is a really important problem to get around right now.
So it's interesting because the business problems we're solving, they involve a variety of tools. So there's no one size fits all solution. So for example, if it's a matter of there's too many manual keystrokes in SAP on the back end of the ERP platform, then we're looking at rapid process automation as a way to speed up the overall cycle time from beginning to end. But then we're having more challenging problems. So for example, typically in those household cleaners and shelf-stable food items, there isn't a lot of standardization across customer pricing. So everyone wants to be unique, treated differently, have a different set of discounts. So we would typically work through that through some less sophisticated tools in the norm, but because of the sheer volume now we're looking at AI, MLs type solutions to figure out how do we take a non-standardized front end that's extremely complicated and simplify it as it flows into a more simplified order management platform. So that's what we're tackling now, is how do we simplify the inputs into a platform that's relatively simplistic in nature, but provide the best possible insights to be able to do that.
That's amazing. That's a great insight, because I think what you're suggesting is that over the years, we've actually built out a very sophisticated front end in terms of a commerce engine. And that's a lot of investment has gone there that allows us to sort of have all of these variations and agility on the front end. And when that front end comes and meets the back end, the middle office and the back office, it creates a problem because those systems haven't kept up in the level of complexity and sophistication in their evolution. And so you end up having a mismatch. And I know part of what you're suggesting is dynamic allocation to reduce the complexity of the front end and thereby actually get just enough right things into the back end. But I suspect also you're probably thinking about taking the back end and bringing it up to the same level of sophistication as the front end. Any thoughts on that part of the movement?
Yeah, so we're having a lot of repurposing conversations.
Yeah.
So when you get into, 10, 20, $30 million ERP platform implementations, you're not looking to upgrade that anytime soon or change providers, right? So what we've done in supply chain is we've really optimized the planning systems. So demand planning and supply planning, and there's been a lot of tool advancement in that area, but we're still working with the same ERP and order management backbone. So now we're looking at how do we repurpose what we have? How do we get more creative and agile using more digital interventions to basically repurpose it, understanding we're not going to replace that investment.
So, and when you say repurpose, one of the things I think we've seen a lot of is you take your core system of record, which has been in place for a while, and you actually almost black box it. You cover it with APIs, and then you surround it with new systems of engagement, systems of intelligence to cover these data-driven decisions and insights that you're talking about, to be able to bring the sophistication of the back end to match the front end. And it sounds like what you're saying is a dual strategy. One is to reduce, on the front end side, the level of complexity you want to push through the back end. But really the other part of it is bring your back end up to the right level of sophistication so you can actually have the perfect supply chain in place. Well, boy, I think about all of that. And the thing that jumps to top of mind as a technologist, as a digital implementer, is actually not the technology, because we all know that there's a number of automation, AI, analytics capabilities that exist today, and experience that can drive that. The real question is change management. It's people. This combination of policy and sales choices and driving change in the organization to get more structured, more responsive. Talk to us a little bit about what that part of the struggle looks like. I know a lot of my viewers come from the digital world, and they're eager to get on to get the bits and bits in place. But what's the people side of the equation?
I consider myself chief change agent. So the number one struggle, supply chain, we have this big ecosystem of different tools and systems and variables. And ultimately, the first question we always have to figure out is where to start. And there's also a large cross-functional team element. So part of the conversations we're having around allocation is, teaching the sales team how supply chain works, teaching supply chain how sales and marketing is working, and then bridging that barrier, whether it be acronyms or language or activities or tool sets, to come to the best possible solution. Because we know in supply chain, if you optimize in one part, you could create unintended effects in other parts. So you really have to look at it from an ecosystem and understand how these different decisions are impacting each other. And honestly, we're having more difficult conversations right now. So supply chain is typically downstream from sales and marketing, and they're taking initiatives and directions from sales and marketing. And now they're in a different position, a seat at the table to inform the front end process. So we're having some interesting conversations and very productive conversations about how the front end and the back end have to work together better, both from a process and a technology standpoint.
That's fascinating to hear. Look, Crista, it's been really helpful for us to get a perspective from your eyes. You're on the front line solving for many of these problems as they come through. I think what I'm hearing from you is, number one, this actually changed overnight. So we're in a situation we've never been before. We have a very sophisticated front end that matches perhaps a much more simplistic back end, and that's creating a significant sort of choke point. It sounds like your view is that the order for the day is to actually get into a more agile, more dynamic allocation to reduce the front end sort of complexity and make it simple. And then think about your back end and bring in surround systems that enhance your ability to deal with all of the variations that come through. But that none of that is really possible till you drive change, until you drive engagement across that value chain and start getting people to start thinking differently. And I think that's critical. And boy, what a wonderful opportunity though, for someone who leads supply chain, for someone who's a supply chain person, to drive a much more strategic conversation and change for the corporations that belong to.
I'll tell you, the most exciting part of my job, it is exhausting. I'm working 12 plus hour days like everyone else in supply chain. But honestly, I can't believe I'm sitting in the middle of this and directing the supply chain response to a public health issue. What I'm doing is directly impacting people's health. And to me, that's probably the most exciting part of what I'm doing, is how do I help the world respond to a pandemic?
Crista, so inspiring to hear from you. Thank you for joining the show today. We have a set of viewers that will probably write to us after this. So if I could ask you to stay on the LinkedIn forum and communicate and respond to questions as they come up, I would very much appreciate it. And I know my viewers would like it. I want to turn to our viewers and say thank you for joining us again. Please keep sending us inputs on items and topics you want us to cover. We'll look forward to catching you next time. Till then, take care.